Well, hello, casual pilot back here. Phil Hinkle coming back at you on our journey to becoming a real pilot and not just an RC pilot. What you're about to see is my first ground school. It took place about a week and a half ago, and we weren't sure how long it was going to take, and it ended up taking much longer than we anticipated. And so I had like one little intro and one outro for this like 2 hour long session. And I just didn't think that would work because I don't think you guys really want to watch that much video at one sitting. So what I've decided to do is break out each of the chapters that we covered. And we covered 4 different chapters from our textbook. And so what I'm going to do is there's a definite spot where we broke each chapter out in the training. So I wanted to come back and make an intro to introduce what we're going to talk about in that first chapter. Then we'll do one of these for each of the chapters, so every video is a shorter piece and not as laborious to sit down and watch. Ground school, let me say this, is very interesting. It's very educational, but it's not quite as entertaining and sexy as getting out there and flying the plane itself. But you will learn some stuff if you hang around. My videos are going to be a little shorter. I'm trying to edit them down to some of the most interesting portions of the video. And the full-length versions will be on my instructor Jake's website, or he will have his own YouTube channel, and you can see the full-length versions there. Some of these that were short enough, you'll see the full-length chapter coverage. Others I have edited down to the really good stuff where I think there's really hardcore core learning going on. So I hope you enjoy the journey. Again, if you like all these videos in my YouTube channel down there on the bottom, please remember to subscribe. Also, I'm attempting to become a pilot on a very, very limited budget, which is why I've started a GoFundMe account. Also, there's a link down in the descriptions to my GoFundMe account. If you wanted to donate and help me on this journey to get farther along easier, that would be awesome. We have raised a little bit of money already. We're looking for some more. If we hit our goal, we'll get some extra camera gear to make these videos even better. But please, if you would consider doing that, that would be much appreciated by us. And, you know, a good amount, we'll call your name out and thank you on one of our videos. So, again, here we go. Our first topic is Aeronautical Decision Management. We call it ADM. There's lots of acronyms in aviation, as you will see. Aeronautical Decision Making pretty much explains what it is. It's what do you do when things are bad. We covered there's multiple different acronyms, mnemonics within ADM. Some of them we will cover. I think my favorite one is the 3 Ps: perceive, process, perform. You perceive a problem, you process that, you perform it. You'll see more about that in the video where we discuss it. Anyway, that's a quick little intro. That's the kind of stuff we'll be covering in our first video. So enjoy, sit back. This one has been edited down because it got fairly long in the original ground school. So you'll see the highlights of it. And down in the description will be a link to Jake's YouTube channel where you can view the entire video if you want. Oh, that wasn't a good flight. He didn't have very good ADM, did he? Today we're going to do a little ADM, Aeronautical Decision Making. It's not going to be heavy on that, but we're going to talk about it a little bit.
Sounds good, Philip. So yeah, as you said, we're going to just briefly touch on aeronautical decision making here. And we're going to continue talking about that throughout all of our ground school lessons, throughout all of our flights. Aeronautical decision making is basically just the FAA's fancy way of saying don't do anything stupid.
And be careful.
Right.
Yeah.
But to that end, we have some processes we go through to help us make good decisions, to take all the information that we have at our disposal, process that, and come up with a good course of action. As we progress through the flights, that will of course be just included in all of our flying, but behind the scenes in my head, and hopefully eventually in your head, there will be these processes going on of taking in all of the information that we are seeing outside the airplane, from the instruments inside the airplane, from what we feel, from what we hear, and making good decisions as to how to conduct
So
our
your
flight.
brain and your head is always moving.
Exactly.
They never sit still.
Exactly. And that only becomes more and more true as you move deeper and deeper into flying. And in fact, as you progress through, if you go beyond the private level, you'll find that increasingly more and more of flying is about processing information, making good decisions, and continuing to be able to make good decisions as we get into more and more complex situations.
Well, that was always one of my fears about being a pilot, is I may get rattled. And reading that decision-making chapters in the book, it's like they lay it all out. Just figure it out. You go through these processes, and,
Exactly.
and you'll be fine. You'll cut your odds down a lot. So.
Exactly. And that's what it's all about ultimately, is risk management.
You mean flying's risky?
There is an inherent level of risk in anything we do. Flying, driving,
True.
Walking across the street. Aviation is one of the safest activities that we do in modern life, and that's mostly because of how we've narrowed in on all of those risk factors and controlled them to the best.
That's why becoming a pilot's not easy. There's a lot of study and a lot of work just to fly a simple plane.
Right. So a lot of the physical skills of actually flying the airplane, much like driving a car, is stuff that you just learn by doing. But the reason that we have ground school is to go through all of the thought processes, all the things that we need to consider, take into account.
It's much more complicated than sitting behind the wheel of a car.
To a certain extent, it is. And as you move further and further into flying, that becomes more and more true.
Yeah.
So when the FAA talks about aeronautical decision making, they have a lot of acronyms, a lot of
I've learned that.
mnemonics, ways of trying to remember how we make good decisions. So obviously we've talked about ADM, Aeronautical Decision Making. Another acronym that comes up in this chapter, which comes up increasingly as you move more into professional flying, is CRM, Crew Resource Management. And the analog of that for recreational flying, single pilot flying, SRM, Single Pilot Resource Management, as the FAA likes to call it nowadays. So they have a number of mnemonics. PAVE, PAVE, which stands for Pilot, Aircraft, Environment, with the V being what they're using, and E for external pressures. They also have something that I was actually talking about a moment ago. They call it the 3P model: perceive, process, perform. So that's what I was talking about when we take in all of that information that we see with our eyes, that we hear, that we feel through the structure of the airplane. That's perception. So we perceive what's going on. Process, we take all of that information, we think about what's happening, we try to understand what's happening, look ahead, sort of predict what will be happening within the next few seconds or minute or whatever it takes to make the decision that's in front of us. And then we come up with a course of action. We perform that course of action. So it may sound like pretty basic stuff when you talk about it, but when you get in the airplane, it really helps to have that foundation of, okay, I'm going to look at what I have, I'm going to figure out what I need to do, and then I'm going to do it.
Yeah, I noticed when I was reading through some of that, they have a whole bunch of different versions.
They do.
But is the 3 Ps are the ones you like? Is that the one I should focus on because that's the one that makes the most sense to you?
It is.
It seems easier to remember because it's 3 Ps. Was it perceive, process, and perform? So
to be quite honest, a lot of this stuff becomes instinctual as we begin to fly.
Right, but I'm not there yet.
And as we get into the lessons in the airplane, there will be individual factors that we'll talk about. So, for example, when we start practicing landings, one thing you'll probably hear me say is, do you think you're high or do you think you're low? And I'm talking about the glide path here coming in for a landing. And you'll take a look at it and say, well, Jake, I think we're high, or I think we're a little bit low, depending on what you see. And then I might come back and say, well, Philip, what are you going to do about it? And that is where you process what you've seen and come up with a course of action, usually either adding some power to flatten our glide a little bit, or maybe putting in a little bit of a slip, since we don't have any flaps on this airplane, to create a little bit more drag. So that's sort of an example of how we perceive what's going on, process that, and turn that into a course of action.
There's just multiple ways of it all becomes second nature.
Exactly.
That's what I'm looking forward to, because I think that'll help me so many other ways.
Exactly.
It's just those three seemed easier to remember than the ones that have 5 P's and a whole bunch of different words in them.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm going with that one.
Sounds good. We're in Chapter 2 of the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. That has to do with all of our risk management, aeronautical decision making, threat and error management, all of that kind of stuff. We've talked a little bit about how we manage our risks. We've talked about the process we go through to make decisions, and also something the FAA loves to harp on, which is a valuable thing to realize, but of course in the moment is hard to see, is hazardous attitudes. So
I remember reading.
Yeah, they have 5 of them. Anti-authority. Their example is don't tell me. Impulsivity. Do it quickly. Invulnerability. It won't happen to me. Macho. I can do it. Or resignation. What's the use? So I've seen pilots at all levels exhibit these to one extent or another. And part of the challenge is, in the moment, if you're experiencing one of these attitudes, it can be very hard to sort of step outside yourself and say, I need to think about this differently.
Right. If I look at those, the one that jumps out at me, is you'll probably catch me doing, it's the do it quickly. When I panic, I go into like hyper mode, and I try and my brain runs, and I try and plan my attack, but I try and move fast to get things done. And that's probably, I'm just telling you now, when we get out there, you might catch me in the middle of that one, and you can throw that impulsivity at me.
And that is why we have procedures and checklists that we follow when we get into a stressful situation, perhaps an emergency like an engine failure, some problem with the aircraft systems, although in the Chief, obviously, we don't have a lot of systems. Not a lot of systems to go wrong. But that's why we have an emergency checklist. So, for example, when we go to practice simulated engine failures, I'll pull the throttle out to idle and we'll be gliding, and I'll have you pull out the emergency checklist and go through all of our items to simulate trying to restart the engine. Of course, it's already running, so...
Well, the Chief's going to be hard to restart an engine if you have to hand prop.
Exactly.
That thing dies, we're screwed. We're looking for a place to land.
Exactly. So, and that's why when we simulate an engine failure, we never do it by actually turning the engine off.
Not in that plane.
We only pull the throttle out, and I may not even pull it out all the way, depending on what I'm simulating, because actually when you pull the throttle out all the way, that propeller basically turns into an air brake and actually creates drag.
Yeah,
so
slows down.
There's a concept called zero thrust, which is the setting where the propeller is not creating thrust, but it's not creating drag yet either. But that's in the future. On our flights, obviously, as I've talked about, it's all about mitigating risk. And here on page 2-7, figure 2-6, we have a very useful sort of checklist to help us assess that risk. So they have different factors, like maybe you didn't sleep well last night, maybe you didn't sleep very much, do you have a cold, are you not feeling well, is the weather not the best, are you feeling stressed that day, is it daytime, is it nighttime, are you under time pressures, and each of these things on this checklist here has a score attached to it, and this kind of matrix can help you to determine what the level of risk on our flight is. And the more risk that you find associated with a particular flight, the more you maybe think, is this actually the day to go fly? And as you gain more experience, there will be factors that will have less impact when you're first learning to fly, and as a newly certificated pilot, you want to be very conservative when making these decisions. Give yourself plenty of capability and reserve for you as a pilot to say, you don't want to push your limits too much. But as you gain experience as a pilot, you'll gain the ability to manage risks more effectively. Another, we were talking about when it's time to call it a day. So a very good graph they have here, figure 2-20. Throughout a flight, what is the workload on us as a pilot, and how much mental energy do we have to deal with the task that we have to accomplish? And this shows during the pre-flight, it's ramping up a little bit, but of course we're on the ground. We're not under any time pressure, or we shouldn't be anyway. So it's just gradually ramping up. Takeoff, we have a lot of stuff going on. We have all our pre-flight checks to run through. We have taxiing out to the runway, possibly air traffic control to deal with. So that ramps up our workload a lot. After takeoff, we get up to cruise flight. If we're just doing cross-country flight or flying out to breakfast somewhere or something, not much going on, so the workload goes down a little bit. And we get to the destination, that's when things get busy, because then we have to look at the chart, make sure we're familiar with the airport we're going to, think about how we're going to get into the pattern. We're communicating with ATC. We might be doing a landing performance calculation based on the conditions that we've gotten from the weather reports. So our workload really spikes up around the approach and landing, and right at that time we're also starting to get fatigued from maybe having had a long flight.
And thinking about all that other stuff.
Thinking about what's going to happen when we get on the ground. Are we meeting someone, or just, we want to get on the ground before they stop serving lunch. And so our capability as a pilot starts to decline, because we've been focusing throughout the whole flight, and now we've got a whole bunch of other stuff on our mind, and right there where the workload goes up and our capability starts to go down, that's where we have to really be careful to take our time, make sure we do all the steps, and get the airplane safely on the ground. Manage the risks, as they say. Whole bunch of stuff here on electronic flight instrumentation, which of course not going to get a lot of in the chief, but that can be great for situational awareness, but it can also introduce a lot of complexity when you get into the more advanced computerized flight information systems. You almost have too much information sometimes. You have so much information coming in that you have to perceive that processing it takes a long
Watched
time.
a few videos of guys doing IFR flights and flying jets, and that Citation Max guys you showed me.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Oh yeah.
It's constant chatter, constant movement.
Yep. So that's a little bit about aeronautical decision making. We'll continue to talk about this as it comes up in the course of future ground schools and in the course of our
It'll
flying.
become a piece of everything we do pretty much.
Exactly, exactly. We want to make sure that we're always making good decisions, always keeping it safe, and just making sure that we're conducting the flight in the best way we can. Being aware of our threats, managing our errors, and just performing top level we can as pilots.
And there you have it. Aeronautical decision making. So much info for this poor old brain to handle and hold, but I can do it and I will do it. What did I learn today? I learned the 3 Ps. Again, I touched on that in the intro. Perceive, process. I'll eventually get those nailed down. Perceive, process, perform. You perceive a problem, you see something needs to be done, you process what that problem is, how you're going to fix it, then you perform, you go out there, you solve the problem. Everything in the cockpit of a plane, similar to a car, just on a larger scale, is a bunch of procedures. You learn every little piece in the cockpit is something you need to make decisions about. And there's just multiple ways to do it. But eventually it becomes second nature in your head. You get this checklist of things. Everything is broken down to procedures and processes that will keep you safe in the air. And that is the most important thing. I want to come down safe and walk away with no damage to me or the aircraft that I'm flying. So this will all get ingrained. And as we do more of our training in the cockpits, in the flight videos, you will see some of these things coming out where Jake will tell me, boom, boom, boom. This is what we need to go through at this phase of our flight. That's all aeronautical decision making. So hope you learned a little bit. Remember, if you like the video, subscribe down there. Like the video too. That helps my rankings in YouTube. Remember to subscribe to the channel to watch this entire journey. And again, I thank you. If you enjoy this journey of becoming a pilot on about the smallest budget possible, please feel free to donate to our GoFundMe campaign. There's also a link down there, as well as if you want to see the entire ground school class from Jake, we will have a link to his YouTube channel as well down in the description. You can't use that as ground school and signed off on it, but you can get a real flavor of what the full ground school will be like off of Jake's channel. Plus, if you watch his and then your instructor has a different way of teaching it, you might learn a little faster because you've seen it from 2 different points of view. So thanks for watching, everybody, and we will see you on episode 3.